All right, hey everybody. Thanks for joining today. My name is Rob Galvin. This is the RhoMobile Suite Tech Talk series. We're not calling it webinars any longer. This is strictly Tech Talk. Tech all the time, all day. So this is for developers primarily, and this is it's kind of the new format that we're going to be doing for the sessions going forward. Okay, so again, for those of you who are just joining us, see a lot of new faces. My name is Rob Galvin. I am the developer community manager for RhoMobile Suite. So you might see my face and messages on Launchpad. But today I'm actually going to be your presenter for today. And today's topic is going to be about the Smart Badge, the SB1 that we recently announced and released. And I'm going to be going through writing applications for the Smart Badge. This presentation is actually available if you want to view it on Google. There's the link, there's the QR code. There are some links embedded inside of the presentation to get you to some of the resources that are available. So if you want to take a look at the presentation, you can. It's available through the link. And as always, if you can just ask questions via the GoToMeeting question tool, that would be fantastic. I am recording this and it will be posted on Launchpad probably by tomorrow. Okay. And then, of course, please give me some feedback. We have some sessions lined up for the rest of the year, but of course, I'd like to make sure that we're making sure we're delivering the right content for you guys in terms of the upcoming sessions. So please let me know what you'd like to see in terms of topics. Next topic is going to be March 6th, so a month from now. And this will be a special session that we have where we're going to actually do a behind the app spotlight, I'm calling it. So I've been asking over the past few tech talks who would like to present as a guest speaker, and we have Banu Marampudi, who is the VP of Engineering for Coutier Technologies. And if you attended the North America App Forum session last year, you may have Banu. He did a presentation on jQuery, and his company wrote a nice application that really showcases a lot of different features that I think this audience would find very valuable. It's an issue tracking system that involves data synchronization with RhoConnect, talking to third-party REST APIs, using OAuth for authentication to those APIs, and going through some UI and additional things as well. So be sure you tune in next time. Banu's going to walk through that application, show you some code on how they did certain things, and I think you definitely find that interesting. The last webinar we did, if in case you missed it, was back in January, which seems like ages ago to me. That was a native extensions webinar. So for those of you who are not familiar with native extensions, that might be a good session for you to review. And I show how to do some basic things like extending one of our existing APIs, as well as introducing some new APIs and actually talking to Android intents. So you might find that session interesting. Be sure to check it out on Launchpad. As always, all of the videos are available on there on demand 24/7. So whenever it's convenient for you, please take a look. All right. So let's get to the topic of today, which is building apps for the Smart Badge, SB1. So we're going to go through, I'm initially going to talk about some resources for you to get started, all right? I've actually been looking at the Smart Badge for a little while now, and these are some of the things that I found have been valuable just as a getting started and making sure you understand what's available to you. So we're going to go through that. I'm going to show you that, and then we're going to get into actually developing a very simple application and walking through that. I'm going to show you some of the typical features that you can use and the services that you can use inside of the Smart Badge application. And then towards the end, we're going to kind of wrap up with some talk about how to make your application perform well on the SP1 and really get the most that you can and deliver an experience to your end users that is appealing. So I have a bunch of slides on that we'll go through. And that should really kind of take us probably about 45 minutes or so, and then we can open it up to questions. Okay. All right. So first things first, let's talk about some getting started resources. Okay. And here's a link. If you download the presentation, you can click on the download link, and that will bring you to our support site that has some developer guide, which I would definitely recommend you review first thing. And I'm actually going to pull some of that content right from that guide and show that to you. And then there's an integrator guide as well, which talks about the device as a whole, tells you how to reboot it and some other things that you may find interesting just about the device. But primarily, take a look at the developer's guide. It really has all of the APIs and the services that are available to you in your application. There's another resource that will be available to you. It's kind of going through the publishing process that we have in Motorola, and it's called Developer Toolbox. So you will see it in that same download section. You should see it pretty soon. But I'm going to actually show it. I have it, and I'm going to show it to you. That is another fantastic resource for getting started. There are several applications and sample user drives that you can just basically copy to the device. I'm gonna walk through some of that now so you can see what I'm talking about. And then lastly, we did some webinars or tech talks last year about performance. And the first one there, front-end UI performance, is one that I did that really applies to this device. If you haven't seen that webinar, I'm going to cover some of that today briefly, but I spent a whole hour just on this topic, and it definitely applies to the SB1 with the e-ink display. So I'll allude to some of that, but there's a link for the webinar. And then Ben Kennedy, who's also on the line, from the RhoElements team, did a session on HTML5 performance techniques, and that is also very useful, particularly around CSS and things that you should be aware of that might impact your user's experience when it comes to the SB1. Okay, so let me show you what this developer toolbox is, and kind of jump right into that, and then we'll go through some demos. So I had downloaded the developer's toolbox, which you should have access to soon. And I am using a Mac, but it doesn't really matter. And I just want to show you that when you download the developer's toolbox, let me zoom in here so you can see what I'm talking about. There are two different user drives. Okay, there's a simple one which basically has I think 1 or 2 applications, and there's a full sample user drive which has quite a bit of applications. I think there's 10 or so applications here that's available, from scanning to authentication to CSS elements, price checking demo I'll show you in a minute. And you can essentially just take these user drives and just copy it right onto the device. So here I have my device, which, by the way, I'm going to show you. I have a real device here connected to my USB port. Now, just so you know, the device that you order does not come with a developer backing. So there's no way to connect this USB cable unless you have the developer backing, which you should really get to make the experience better. You'll be able to connect the device. It'll appear as a mass storage device. You'll be able to copy your files on there. You should really make sure you get your hands on one or order one. And it's just a typical USB cable. So I have that connected to my laptop here. And this is showing the user drive. And I essentially just took this user drive here, this apps folder, config, and fonts, and copied it to the root. This is the root of the device. Okay. And then by rebooting the device, you'll basically have all of these applications that are available to you. So let me just show you what happens. So you'll have this set of applications available to you. You won't have the webinar one. That's the one I added, and I'll show you how to do that. But right from the beginning, without even touching code, going into code, you can take a look and see how different things perform, and then crack open the code that's actually performing that. So if I take a look at this demo scam application, this is basically a simple UI, and scan in a barcode, and you can see it displays an image as well as some text about the product. So it's a very useful, just kind of getting started. It looks like I scanned the same one. Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to show that to you so you can just jump right in and get started with the device. So now let me talk about the applications and what is involved in getting this set up. So now you can write your own application. So you spend some time taking a look at the demo applications, looked at some code, and now you're all ready to go ahead on in and write your own application. So before you do it, let's just kind of a brief overview of what an application is. So on the SB1, the UI and all the applications are essentially web apps, right? So they're hooking up to either your backend, local HTML files on the device, and it's essentially a browser-based application. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind because the same concepts that apply to web apps, whether mobile apps or just even typical web server applications, will still apply to these applications in this device. It's sitting on top of our Motorola WebKit that we use for RhoElements on our other devices. And in between, you have a set of libraries that we expose via JavaScript to expose some services, so notification, keyboard services, as well as user authentication services as well. And I'm going to show you that. And then also you have APIs that come from RhoElements to do things like scanning, file transfer, pushing messages down to the device, etc. So this is what your application stack will look like. Okay, now let's talk about, okay, so now you want to start developing an application and writing your application. There's a couple of files that are really important that you need to understand their role and where they should go and where they should, what you should do with them. The first one is ASL for Application Service Library.js. This is essentially going to give your application all of the services that the device provides. And I'll get into some examples later on exactly what those services are. But things like notification, keyboard services, UI types of things, this is required, right? And it is needed to be there in your HTML pages. In fact, it's really needed to be there as the first library so that it's basically setting up the services properly. Now you can have this file on the device in your local files, right? If you want to serve your local HTML pages from the device, or if you're serving your web pages from a web server, this could reside on your web server. Okay, so it needs to be in the location of where the HTML pages are. There's another file as well, which is called asl.css. So this is a CSS library that we provide and we recommend that you use that override some of the default styling. So there's some overrides for buttons and inputs, and you can look at that file and see what it actually does. But it's primarily there to ensure that certain elements are sized and positioned correctly to fit on the screen. Okay, so those are two important files, and those are typical, same way that you would include other JavaScript or CSS files are shown there. Okay, so now you have to configure the device so that it recognizes your application. So how does the device know what applications to expose on that applications page? Well, it's done through this file called config.js. Okay, and there are several other things in config.js that could affect your application. But the most important thing you need to know is this option for configs.apps.source. Okay. What this does is it points to a location of where yet another file is called apps.json. Okay, and I'll show you this file in a second. But this apps.json file is what is going to describe to the shell interface what to expose on the applications page and where those applications reside. Okay, so this is really, really important that if you sit there and you write your application and now you don't see it, maybe you didn't, you're not pointing to the right apps.json, or maybe your apps.json is corrupted. Okay, so when you make these changes to the config file, you need to reboot the device, which is, if you haven't figured it out, there's only two buttons on the device, the scan button and the home button. If you hold those two down for 5 seconds, you should see the device reboot, and then the config file will be read. Okay, so now let's take a look at the apps.json file. So apps.json is a file that has an array, a JSON string of applications, and this is a typical JSON file that has a name, a type, and a value, right? So in this case, we have 4 properties that you can choose to expose. You need to have a name and a URL. That is definitely required. So this is what will appear on the screen, and this is where the URL is where the application is located, where the starting HTML page is located. So you'll see in the demo drive that all of the applications are local. So this is going to reference a URL that's local to the device. And you can also provide a different icon if you want to, which is probably recommended to show up on that page. But the URL can also point to a remote web page. Okay, so if you have it on a remote web server that's local to your network and it's accessible, you can point your application to your server. Now, if you are doing that to your server, you could, since this is a WebKit based browser, right? You could take advantage of HTML5 app caching and set it up so that this application can behave in a disconnected or connected mode. I'm not going to get into that particular feature in this webinar, but it's something you can consider. It's actually covered in the developer's guide, and there's really nothing special that we're doing here. This is just your typical HTML5 feature that you can choose to expose. Okay, so now what I've done is let's take a look at my apps.js. Let's take a look at these files on the device. So I am still connected, and I just want to make sure you know that. Oops, sorry, wrong view there. When you're connected via USB, the device does not see the user drive. Okay, so when you're trying to run an application from the user drive, you have to be disconnected. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like, and then I'm going to disconnect from my USB cable. So if I take this is my device. This is connected to my laptop here, and what I've done is I've taken the apps.json, okay, and I added this entry here. Okay, and I've essentially just said, hey, point to this is my local network. This is where my local web server is on my laptop. Okay, so I've essentially added that already, and we're going to use that page to start showing you how to do certain things with our API. So I added this entry to my apps.json, and I rebooted, and that is why on the device, if I go back to the home screen, the applications, you'll see that we now see this webinar entry listed there, okay? And then, oh, by the way, when I first started, what was a little confusing, it was like, why are all these X's appearing? Well, I didn't read the guide like I probably should have, and that's because that application is running. So this device does support multiple applications running. There's a configuration parameter for that. I think the default is 5. And if you want to just go back to that particular application, I can click outside of the X button. But if I want to cancel it, which I'm going to now, I would just hit the X button, and it actually will kill the application. Okay. All right. So now let's start. So now I've configured my device to point to my my local machine's web server, and which right now just looks like a very basic page. Okay. There's really nothing there. There's my references to my ASL.js and also ASL.css, which are local to my web server. Okay, so this will allow me to start, playing with this file and showing you some of the features. So let's talk about some of these typical features that you would start writing with. So the first one is some UI services that we expose. So keep in mind this device is a small screen factor, right? It's 320 by 240. And typically what you're going to provide is, a title bar so the user knows which screen they're on, a back button, we call it, so you can traverse between applications. There's the main content area, and then possibly if you want to expose an options button, which allows you to provide almost like a menu to the application. So if you want to jump between tasks, etc. I think typically most applications will be a single task type of thing, but you may have applications for this device that have many different choices. So this is what you can do. Okay, and so basically what I'm going to do now on my code is to write this, and I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Okay, so if I take a look at this this page on the device now, Let's just show that to you so you can see what it looks like. And by the way, there's a configuration parameter for the timeout screen, which I probably should have increased so we don't have to keep seeing that. Okay, there's nothing there, right? So, and there's actually no way to get back unless I hit the home button. So I'm going to hit the home button, and I'm going to cancel this application. Okay, so now let's add some typical things that you will add to your application. So I'm using Sublime Text 2, which, by the way, I did a webinar on this, so you might want to watch it. It's a pretty cool tool. And I'm going to add a back button. And in this case, because I'm reloading the page, I want to say, okay, when this button is clicked, you have to provide the callback, right? So this is a JavaScript way. I'm just including it inside of my back braces here. So when the back button is pushed, I'm basically going to reload the page. So this way I can just refresh the page and show you what's going on. Okay. And then this is the second parameter you provide is an icon if you want to. Otherwise, it'll just default to the default back button. And then I'm also going to add a title. I'm going to change the title. So this is my webinar demo. Okay. And now let's take a look and see what this actually looks like. So I click on the webinar. It's actually going to this page, and now you actually see that there's a title, as well as that reload button, which is a graphic that I provided, as well as the content body. So this title portion will, override this page. It will always be on top there, no matter if I rotate the device or not. This title will appear there. So not very interesting, but if I click that button, you can see that the page reloads. Okay. So not very interesting, but just want to show you just a basic way to making sure that you have your page structure, started so you can start developing the application. Okay. So let me just jump back to the slides. All right, I already did the demo. Okay, so now we also have the concept of events, right? So the device has some predefined events, and you can look at all of them in the developer's guide. But one of them is kind of key is the loaded event, right? So when the device is loaded, and it's all ready to go, this is where you should most typically put your initialization code and your code in there, especially around things like using the ASL APIs. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And we're actually in our application, we're just going to enable a scanner, and it's going to be kind of like a very simple inventory application. And there are many different types of events that come in the device, and they're kind of in different categories. There's state events, so whether it got focused or loaded or killed. If you want to save some data before the application is killed, you can do that. Some cradle events, which I'm going to show you. So when the device is inserted into the cradle, you might want to automatically synchronize some data that they might have been collecting. And then also there's some networking events. So if your application is using a web server, you definitely want to pay attention to if the signal was lost or not. And you can also fire your own custom defined events, which I'm not going to demonstrate here, but it's in the developer guide. And you can basically, fire one event and have another application register for that event, so you can, kind of talk between applications or screens. Okay. And so some of the other APIs that we provide are called RhoElements APIs, and these come from RhoElements. So on the doc, if you download it, these are links to the specific APIs that are in RhoElements. So they're documented online and briefly documented in the SB1 Developer's Guide. But be sure to check those out so you can see what's available to you. And we're going to be using the JavaScript methods for these. I'm going to show you how to do the scanner. One particular interesting thing that you may want to take advantage of is we call it a Scan To app. So on the device, on the homepage, if the user just picked the device up out of the cradle and maybe somebody else didn't leave it in the right state that user would like to be in the application, this will allow the user to just pick up the device and start scanning, and it'll go to this specified URL. So in this case, we're doing the local a local application, and it'll send. In this case, I'm just sending the data, but you can also send the full JSON object as described in the API. Okay, and this way, this application will then get these as query parameters and can start, jumping right in. So there is a config option to do that. There's also some so for this scan to application, there's some default settings that you might want to consider as well. Okay, and there's other things as well. Probably one of the most interesting APIs that your application may want to take advantage of is push. And if I have time, which let me just check on time here. If I have time, I'll try to show that, but I'll probably run out of time. But I'll describe it really quickly here. So push basically allows a web server or some other application to send a message down to the device. And essentially what it does is it's like an HTTP, post or get, and it sends it down. So remember, the device is kind of running this mini web server, if you will. So and in order for it to receive the push messages, you would have to set it up with a different port number, right? In this case, the default is 8080. And then from your application, if you wanted to send down a message, you would send it down to the IP address of the device with the port, and then you would basically send it down to the application name. You have to specify the application name and along with your message. Okay, so when it's received on the receiving end, you're subscribing to the push detected message event, and you can do with whatever you want with these parameters that are passed in. Okay, so it's on the toolkit as a demo application, and if I have time, I'll show that to you later. But I just wanted to mention it here. All right, so why don't we go into the code and start adding our scanning application and make this a little bit more interesting. So remember, I wanted to do the on load. Okay, so when the application is loaded and ASL is fully loaded, I'm going to enable my scanner. Oops. Okay, so it's just doing a scanner.enable, which is turning on the scanner, and then I have to tell the scanner what to do when a decode happens. So when a barcode is sent, and what I'm doing here is I'm calling the decode event.json. So let me write that decode event, which I have a little Sublime text to snippet already defined. Whoops. And what I'm doing is this event comes in, a JSON object is passed in, and I'm getting the data. And all I'm doing is I'm going to display this scanned in barcode into this div tag here, just so you can see it working. Okay. And then while I'm in here, why don't let's show you the cradle event, because what I might want to do is I might want to scan a bunch of data, and then when the device is inserted into the cradle, do something with that. So let me add that, and I'll kind of describe what's happening here. So I'm subscribing to this event, which is called cradle insert. And when this event happens, I'm going to execute this function. And in this case, I'm just going to show an alert to show you that it was inserted. Okay, but in other cases, you may want to do something else, like send the data back to to the web server, what have you, right? So let me save this. Okay, so I just saved this file, and now let's run it on the device. And let me show you the device there. It's a little fuzzy, I don't know why, but okay. Hopefully this camera will focus soon if I keep it steady. Which is better. All right, well, let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so the page is refreshed, and now let's scan in a bar. Whoops, I hit the home button instead of the scan button. Okay. That's a little hard to make out with the camera, which is supposed to be autofocus. I don't know why it's doing that, but anyway, the barcode is there. Okay, so there you go. We have a simple, enabled the scanner, captured the data, did something with it on the page, and now let's dock it so you can see that cradle event fire off. All right, so you can see when you cradle the device, it goes to the home screen automatically, but this kind of space in the middle here is the last running application. It's kind of, grayed out. So if I tap on it, we'll jump back to the application, and you can see that the alert tab, the cradle event was fired and kicked off the alert, okay, which is a typical JavaScript alert. All right, so those are some really basic things. Not, he's probably saying, Rob, it's pretty basic, not super exciting. Yeah, I know. So I'm getting to the good stuff. So by the way, so now let's talk about notifications, right? So on the device, through ASL, through the ASL library, there is a way you can notify the user. Okay, and this is all documented in the developer guide. But the one thing to note is on the home screen, we have this little icon that shows notifications that have come in. So maybe you want to tell this person to do something. You have different choices, right? And let me just describe what's happening here. We have an API called asl.notify. There's a type, right? So there's application, server, and system. And essentially, it allows us to delineate different types of alerts so you can turn beeping on and off. But this is how you would kind of beep the device and alert the user to that he needs to do something, okay? We have a priority, which right now is not used in the system, but it could be going forward. The next parameter is a title, okay? So the title of what's going to appear on this alert. The text that goes in the alert. And then here's the good stuff is you can actually provide some buttons, right? So you can provide 2 buttons for this alert, and you can describe what's in those buttons. So in this case, I'm telling the person that we have to restock, and I want to allow him to accept or dismiss this alert. And what follows this is what do we do, callbacks, right? So what do we do when the user clicks accept? So the first entry in this array here is corresponding to the first button, right? So if the user clicks accept, we're going to go to this page, for example, and pass in these parameters, okay? That's just a simple example. And if he dismisses it, do nothing, okay? So those correspond to those buttons. Now the next parameter here is a timeout, which is very important. The timeout will basically is the number of seconds this notification is up. Okay. Now, if you want the user to not dismiss, not dismiss this, but if you want that alert to stay up until the user takes some sort of action, you would set this value to 0. Okay. If you set it to 0, it's the notification won't appear in the kind of inbox, if you will, of the device. Okay. This particular notification inbox will basically list all of the notifications that the user didn't attend to, right? So I'll show you that in a second. Okay. And just want to mention, there's a couple of config parameters. This is in the config the config file, where you can control the beeper volume levels, how long the beep should be, the tone of the beep via frequency. And then, like I said before, for different alerts, maybe for an application alert, you don't want to sound the beep, but if it's a system alert, you do, okay? And so these are probably typically be controlled by somebody who's setting up the device and administering it. But just wanted to make sure you're aware of these parameters could affect the behavior of your application. All right, so let's put in a quick alert here. So now let's do it in when I scan data. Let's pretend, I check something on the back end, and now I want to let the person know what to do, right? So let's put in a notify. And in this case, I'm sending this message, basically the same one. But when the person accepts this message, we're going to just change the title of the page, and we're going to change the content div to something else, just so you can see what happens. But typically, you would be doing something else here. So let's save that. And notice I have a 5-second timeout. So I'm going to demonstrate what I was just talking about before. Let's go to the device, which is in focus now. I guess I won't move it, but let's zoom in so you can see. All right, there's that pesky home screen. Let's go back to the application, which I'm not going to X. I'm just going to go back. So notice I didn't hit the X and the barcode's still there. So let's refresh the page, just because I added that code. And now let's scan into the barcode. Okay, so there's the alert notification that we put in. Notice it has the accept and the dismiss, and there's about 5 seconds for it to disappear. Now, if we go back to the home screen, you can see that there's a notification here with a little badge, a star badge. So this is like if the user put the device down, the alert came in, and he didn't attend to it. And it may not be maybe it's an alert that's not super duper critical. So, that's why we have the timeout set to 5. If it was critical, I would keep it at 0. So this way the user must attend to that. But let's pretend it's not. So now the user can come back in here, and I can see my restock title. And I'm just going to click on that. So will bring up that same alert that was displayed before, and with the same options. Now, when I click accept, it's going to do that same callback that we did before, which should change the title of the page to restock and change the page to that, the content of the page. So it basically executed a JavaScript that's below that. Okay, so that's how you would do notifications. So you have a couple of different choices with that. So let's zoom out and go back to the slides. All right, so a couple things I'm going to really fly through because this is all documented in the user guide, and I want to get to some of the performance-related topics that we want to talk about. So if you notice on the device, obviously there's no physical keyboard. It's a small device. It's really, just as a best practice, I would recommend trying to stay away from inputting things with the text with the keyboard, and try to make your application as touchless friendly as possible, right? Scanning, whatever, if you can. But if you need to, there's a couple of different things that may make it easier, right? So input, this is a typical HTML input tag, okay? And you could change the behavior of the keyboard just by changing the type. So if you say input type equals number, and this follows the same HTML5 input nomenclature, right? So if you input type is number, you're going to get a number keypad. Okay. If you don't specify number, I think the choices are number, date, time, pin, password. There's a couple of different ones that come out of the box. And if you don't specify anything, it's going to default to the standard text keyboard. Okay. There are a couple of other properties for this tag that will come in handy in terms of usability. I recommend you consider using them. And they go hand in hand, these two, max length and data auto return. So max length is, let's say, all of your user IDs were 6 digits long, and it was a number, right? In this case, it's 4. Let's pretend your user IDs were 4, and on some form they had to put in their user ID. Well, you could just not include these, and the user would have to type 1, 2, 3, 4, enter. But if you specified max length equals 4 and data return, auto return equals true, as soon as it gets to 4, it's going to close this keyboard and return back to your application. So that's a nice usability feature, so they don't have to click another button. Okay, and at the same time, there's also, you can subscribe to an on-change event. So in this case, maybe it's a product lookup, and maybe you want to display a list, the top 3 products that match this lookup. Maybe you have long hairy product IDs, but the first three or 4 digits mean something, whatever, I don't know. So as you're keying these in, you can do some sort of asynchronous call like retrieve data or whatever, and then once you hit the magical number, return to your application, and it would already be there since that is all happening in the background, right? So that's kind of a nice thing that you may want to consider depending on the scenario. A couple of things I just want to mention about keyboards is that they're customizable, which is fantastic, right? So if you look at the keyboard files, and I'll show you on the user drives where they are. You'll see that we reference this locale, right? So there's a property for a user, right? So if you have users, an application that spans across many different locales, you can have different users using different keyboards, which is really cool. And it's all keyed off of this locale property for the user. So this is a default user that's in the config file. And right now it's enus, and I have a file that is basically the same name that also has enus, and it describes the keyboard. So these labels and these actions correspond to the keyboard. So you can go in there and change those and make your keyboards whatever you want, right? So that's kind of a nice feature. All right, just a quick mention on alerts and confirms. These are typical JavaScript. Alert is an alert. We do automatic formatting of alerts, so they kind of appear like this. There's really nothing special you need to do if your application already has alerts. You can use those, and the alert will take up the full screen and basically show an OK button. We also have a confirm, which behaves a little bit differently than typical JavaScript. In this case, we pass in a title, a description here that will appear in the confirm box, and then a callback. So if the user clicks OK, then this information will, this function will be executed. So any code inside this function will be executed when they click OK. So it's a little different than typical confirm box. So I just thought I'd mention it. All right. So one other useful thing of the device is that, as I mentioned before, different users could use the device, and the keyboards could change, but also applications can change, right? So what you would do is you would set up the device so that it requires login. Okay, so this allows you to use the device with many different people and have maybe a manager get a certain set of apps, Joe Clerk, get a different set of apps, what have you. So in the config.js, by default, it's turned off. So there's no login required. If you turn it on, you need to specify where the login page is, so you can customize what that login page looks like. But the important thing is that in this login page, which is kind of an example here, needs to have the SL, of course, and it also it needs to, once it's done processing the login information, call asl.auth, which basically tells the device true or false if this user is authenticated. And if they are, you can pass in a list of another JSON file, which basically will describe what applications are available to that user. And you can also provide other things like a PIN code, right? So you can set up this device so that multiple users can do this. I'm not going to demonstrate this because it requires rebooting a little bit of time that we're not going to have. But if you look in the toolbox, you will see an example of this, and you can play with that. Okay. Along with customizing the keyboard, you can also customize the different strings that come up. So the default strings that come in throughout the device is customizable by you. In the developer's guide, we call it localization, but I call it string resources because certain customers may want to who may not want to localize it. They just might want to change what the typical OK is or whatever, right? Or press home, what have you. So you can go in there and customize that. Just be careful because the application is looking for these strings, and if you kill one, we may not be able to. The user may not be able to continue on. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about some browser dev tools and how you can. It looks like I got about 15 minutes, so I was hoping I had more time for this. But okay, let me show you something really cool that will help you develop for the SB1. Okay, so let me jump into Chrome. And this is a kind of a nice way for you to develop, in a suggested way, I feel, before you actually put anything on the device. Okay, work out all your kinks, work out all your layout, make sure your JavaScript is functioning, make sure it's performing well, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm in Chrome, and here I just loaded the price checker application that we include with the device. Notice it takes up the whole screen. I'm going to bring up the Chrome DevTools, which you should get very familiar with. And I'm going to go into the overrides here. So I click the little gear, and normally it starts on general, but I'm going to click overrides, and I'm going to make the device 320 by 240. Why is that important? Well, the device is 320 by 240, so let's make sure everything fits on the screen and that we have a good user experience. So do that, definitely do that. Right? Look at the application. So in this case, if I looked at my JavaScript that I have in here, you can see that I'm simulating the decode event by just clicking, right? So let me click on that. So right now I can take a look at the application. I can come in here. I can say, okay, what would this look like if, this wasn't black or whatever, right? You can come in here, mess around with sizes and just see how much space you have for things, and making sure that your CSS is working nicely. Now I'm using the ASL.CSS, so in some cases you should see that appear on the right-hand side. Okay, so definitely use this tool to make sure that your application is performing nicely and it fits on the screen. And speaking of performance, okay, this is a really big thing, right? So this device has e-ink, as you know, And anytime we have to paint on the device, um, it takes some time, right? And that's just the nature of the beast. So what do you do about it? Okay, you minimize the number of paints and redraws that the WebKit engine has to make. Okay, well, how do you know what it's doing, right? And this is what gets everybody. This is like the biggest thing when it comes to performance. What are your users going to see? They're going to look at the device. They're going to tap it. They're going to expect fast response. Everybody's used to lightning response from their mobile devices. You need to make it as responsive as possible. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I did a whole 60 minutes on this very topic. Right? I don't have time to cover it now. Watch the webinar. There's a QR code. There's the link. Watch it. Here's a simple example slide that I pulled from it. There's two functions, right? In this function, we're basically doing the same thing. We're referencing an object, we're setting an attribute, we're changing an attribute on a device. And it's the same exact code, just done in a different order, right? So this is slow because I'm doing my sets and gets in kind of different order. And essentially what I do is I invalidate the DOM when I really shouldn't. So it does this repainting, recalculating, and then does a paint. Well, in fact, if you just simply reorder things, you will effectively just eliminate that recalculate style and possibly even eliminate some repaints. So in this case, I don't have time to show you how to do it the right way. I'll come back with that with the blog post. But you could see in this example, there's some recalculates, paint. There's like, ideally, we'd like to try and minimize that as much as possible. And again, I cover this topic in great detail. So spend some time watching the webinar. Um, Overall, there are certain things that trigger reflows and repaints, CSS elements, the way you're doing your JavaScript, and there are ways around it. So you can do things like manipulate the DOM, so-called offline, and then come in and just have one repaint, one recalculate style instead of many. So what you'll see, particularly on this device, is a lot of things flashing, even when it has to draw a border. That's processing, right? So if you can eliminate it, and still have your application function nicely, definitely do that. The users are going to appreciate that, I believe. All right, here's some other considerations for our e-ink display, right? The first one is, everybody's used to animated transitions and all this whiz bang on your mobile devices, which is great on those devices, but on an e-ink display, it's not so great, right? So you have to stay away from animations, transitions, anything that is moving. Even if you reboot the device, you'll see that spinner cursor come up. And if you have a spinner cursor in there, waiting for the user, telling the user to wait, I would use something that doesn't spin, right? Just use a static, display. So, anyways, try to stay away from animations and trims. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that, the user experience will be different, right? And then also paging. You can't really do scrolling with the device, so you want to have small pages rendered on the device and allow users to page. So when you have a list, and I'll show you something that we provide out of the box for paging, okay? And then just keep aware of making changes to the DOM elements. So if you need to change a certain attribute, let's say you want to change the text of a button or something, just change the text value. Don't apply the whole style to the button, because it's going to look at the repaints and the recalculate styles and try to minimize those, basically, right? Okay, the other thing is the color side of things. Now, this device is 4-bit grayscale, okay? And it automatically converts, colors down to the grayscale, which is great. I mean, you saw some of those pictures of, the barcodes that I scanned. I think those look pretty good, right, on the device. But keep in mind that, this is extra processing that the device does. So if you can convert your graphics and provide a different resolution, it may be quicker, and it'll definitely save on the size of the file. So if you're doing an application from a web server, it's going to download it quicker, and it'll take up less memory on the device in terms of the cache and everything. So definitely keep that in consideration. Doesn't mean you have to, but see if you change your graphic down to a lower resolution, lower color, what that does to file size and the performance on the app. Okay. Another thing I want you to be aware of, this is more on the usability side considerations, is the device is not backlit, so it will look different under different lighting conditions. So, take a look at the color scheme that you're using and try to use, a pretty high contrast scheme. So black on white, white on black, under different lighting conditions, certain screens will look better than others. And just be aware of that. So this way, again, you can deliver the best experience to the user. And then other things that we're very used to, and come a lot with the default, UI frameworks that we download off the internet, are all of these CSS3 attributes like gradients, transparencies, shadows, borders around. You may not even know unless you inspect that particular element with the WebKit dev tools that your font, has a text border around it, or the button has a border plus a border shadow. And like if you eliminate those things, it'll definitely improve performance. All these things that we can shave millisecond wise will improve performance on the device. Okay, so be aware of those. And I covered a lot, like I said, a lot of these topics in that other webinar. Okay, so we have a paging class and an example paging application in the user drive. It's very lightweight, just an example to show you how a list could appear. And you can see that a typical list would basically hold like 4 items normally, and you might want to have a pager on the right-hand side. So it provides an example of that. You might want to take that and enhance that. You need to kind of do your own handling of navigation between the pages, but it's an example there you can consider. Okay, so we include that. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is to take a look at some approaches to the application for this device, and this applies also to other applications that you may be writing for RhoMobile Suite and Roads. Okay, single page application architectures may be something you want to consider, right? This doesn't mean you have all your code in one page, right? This basically means that you have your resources loaded and you're not doing full page refreshes. So especially if the application is sitting on a web server, if you can avoid the round trip, right? Definitely do that. Okay, even locally to the device, just doing that full page refresh is going to cause it could cause things to be recompiled, like all the JavaScript and all the things that, restructuring the DOM. Maybe only a certain piece of the UI is going to change. Now, it's not a very big UI, but still, even if you're just kind of refreshing the main content area, you may want to consider a single page application architecture. Some frameworks that could come in handy, which again is a whole nother full webinar, which I'll probably end up doing, is to consider using backbone.js, underscore.js. This allows you to build a pretty complex single page application, but your code is not one big hairy mess. It's actually nicely divided. And oh, by the way, it's using this model view controller approach, the same that we use on RhoMobile. So those concepts will definitely make sense to you if you're familiar with Roads and RhoMobile. And it's a nice way to structure your code and to kind of decouple the DOM from the data. And what's really, really nice is that you can provide templates for the HTML. So in the case of the price lookup, instead of manipulating the actual DOM elements, what I could have done was I could have actually used a template to pass in my data to, and then the HTML is all kind of figured out using the JavaScript library. And then I just make one hit to the DOM by replacing the HTML instead of multiple hits. Okay, so this is a really nice way, and you can see some performance gains, I think, from on the SB1 to doing this. Okay. All right, so I think that's the end of the content. I just wanted to show that page there so you can make sure that you get to the resources. Let me open it up for questions, which I didn't look at the questions while they were coming in. And while the questions are coming in, let's give you a question. I always like to do this. Make sure you guys are. This is my see who's still awake test. Okay. So what I'm asking you is, what performance tuning do you always perform, right? What do you do all the time religiously, right? Are you checking? Are you doing network-related types of checks where you're, wanting to see how well your web services calls are coming back, right? Are you doing data-related performance tuning where you want to make sure that, hey, if you're making that web service call to get the data, do you really need all the fields, or do you just need the title and the description, right? JavaScript related, so this is about just your general JavaScript handling and performance, and then rendering UI is more about like the reflows, repainting, And then usability kind of relates to rendering UI. So I'm just kind of curious, what do you guys always do? So pick the ones that you always do without fail. Just kind of curious. So anyway, let's get to some of the questions. All right, so I see some questions. Let's see. Is this like Sencha programming type? Mariano, I'm not sure what slide you were talking about. Sencha has a similar kind of model view controller. I would say it's probably too heavy for this device. Now, because the backbone is definitely a very lightweight library that you can basically accomplish the same thing. Okay. Where can we download? Oops. Where can we download the presentation? Okay. Let me put that link back up. Oops, that wasn't it. Okay, so there's the link for the presentation. If you want to download it, it has those links to those resources. Okay, let's see this. Do we need a separate license, or is it included with the device? Okay, so for other devices, for RhoElements, we have we need a license. This device, the license is built in, and I don't know if Ben's still on the line. Ben, you still there or no?
I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, that the license is pre-built into this device. You don't need to acquire a license for using the RhoElements APIs, correct? I believe
That's
so.
correct. It's a device
Yeah.
license, so any app.
Okay, sorry, I was cutting you off while you were talking. Yeah, Luis, so you don't need another license for that. Okay. All right, so let's see. Do we have any other questions? Somebody was asking about the keyboards. Let me just show you that. So if I go into the sample user drive and look at the config, you can see that we have a keyboard file here. It's keyboard-en-us. So all of these locale information is important, because inside the config, we are using the same locale, right? So that's how you would come in here. You can modify, maybe you don't want ABC, whatever, maybe you want something else. And then here's the resources. There's a whole bunch of resources you can manipulate. Okay. And so there you have it. All right, let's see what else. What other questions? Oh, by the way, let me show the poll and share the results. Wow. Okay. So not so much JavaScript, more than I expected on the rendering UI related, although that's kind of a vague question. So, all right, let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, there is. I could not see the link. The poll screen is on. Yes. Okay, sorry about that. Let's hide the results and put that back. Okay, so there's the presentation. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. So there's the presentation. There we go. Thanks for letting me know, Kathy and Sabu. All right, somebody's asking, you showed the locale-specific keyboards in the config file. Can the keyboard locale be changed on the fly based on user choosing a locale for the app? I don't think it could be changed on the fly, right, Ben? I believe that can be changed on the fly only if you implement the authentication scheme, so that this way, when the user logs in, the keyboard is set. I don't think you can change the keyboard on the fly. Well, actually, maybe you can. Ben, do you know the answer to that
I
one?
don't think you can.
I know you
But
can.
yes, you can do it by user.
Yeah, so you
If the
can.
user's logged in, then you can do it that way. But other way, no, I
Yeah,
don't think so.
you can't change the locale, but you can specify. You can launch a keyboard. So here's the developer's guide. You can, launch a keyboard, a certain type, programmatically, but not the locale. So that's probably a good recommendation for an improvement. Okay, next question. If I use Eclipse to develop Android applications, I still use your RhoElements APIs. Yeah, so like I said, some of the RhoElements APIs are available, not all of them. Where's the API list? Let's see, where is it on my slide? So we have some of them exposed: file transfer scanner, WLAN, battery, signal, key capture, push. And those are the same role elements APIs. In the developer's guide, there's a note on one or two of these, which is a slight difference. But for the most part, the scanner properties and parameters, let's say, for example, is the same as what you would do in row elements. So it's the same thing that applies. Okay, Mahesh, can the code for the device be developed in the Row Suite software, or can we use any IDE? Yeah, so you can use anything you want, right? Use anything you want. At the end of the day, the device is rendering HTML. So whether that's pointing to a backend that's a .NET server, JSP server, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you want. The important thing is you need to make sure you include that ASL.js, and we're recommending the CSS file as well, right? So that's the important thing, is that you include those libraries inside of your application. If you don't, you need to have the ASL.js. You could get away with not using the CSS if you manage your own CSS properly. But you definitely need the ASL.js in order for it to work. And you can just simply add that to your code. Please display the link. Yeah. Okay, got that. Thank you. Okay, where can I get sample applications for the Smart Badge? So sample applications is going to be inside this thing called the Developer Toolkit. As of yesterday, I didn't check this morning, it wasn't there yet, but it should be there soon. And like I said, you're going to get this the zip file, which contains these sample user drives, and there's two of them. The full one has a whole bunch of sample codes. There's even that authentication one with sample user, different user applications. So it has this login screen. So there's a whole bunch there. That's enough probably to get started. All right, you'll have the barcodes for the price checker application. Okay. All right, so next question. They're coming in fast and furious. Since it's a small screen device, how do you compare full page refresh versus Ajax? Yeah, so you can, generally speaking, I always recommend that full page refreshes are avoided, right? It's just, if you can handle things via Ajax and single page architecture and change the contents of the screen, and think about this device, I see most of the use cases are more simplified tasks. Remember, this is a low end, not low end device, a low price device. And users, have, it's a task based device, right? Typically, somebody's going to be doing a certain set of things. I imagine the applications and number of screens are not going to be that great. So the trade-off is really, don't avoid the full page refresh, especially when it has to rebuild the UI and DOM and repaint and all that stuff. It really is noticeable, or could be noticeable and annoying to users. So think about that as you develop your application. Okay, about the push message, is the message delivery and queuing taken care? Okay. Okay, so so somebody's asking about push, and all right, what happens if we send multiple pushes, right? So for example, if the device that should get the push messages offline, or if many messages are sent. No, so think about the push. This is a more simplified push, right? When you do the push from the server, you're basically sending an HTTP request, and you're getting a response back. So you'll get a response okay if it hit the device. You'll get something else, 504 or whatever, when it's not there. So on your server side, you would essentially, when you're making that call, keep track of if the device received it or not, and then when the device comes back online, that device could send a message on the loaded event, whatever, or signal change event back up to the server, and then your server could send the message down. So it's basically, there's no real queuing to the push. It's just send a push message down, and it's very useful just for simple things. Telling the user there's a new task, so that this way the device doesn't have to constantly pull the server. So that's really what it's about. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Okay, how can we display information out of the ASL profile in our app? The name of the user logged in. That's a good question. I don't think that's available.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I had a feeling there was a way, but I can't remember nor find the information, so I'm going to have to check up on it.
Okay, Ewald, Ben and I will dig into that, and I'm going to post any questions that we can't answer. I'll post on Launchpad with the recording, so you'll see that. Okay. I want to say there is a way, but I can't remember either. Are you planning to make these recordings? Yes, the recording will be available shortly after this webinar. Yeah, so can user login authentication be performed from a web server instead of on the device? Yeah, so what I had showed you was we actually, and I should have mentioned this before, we have two ways to do the authentication. There's a system authentication, which is for the device as a whole. And remember, when I set that up in my, let me jump back to the slides. When I set that up in my system, I'm specifying where is the login page. So you can actually point to your server, your web server that handles the login. You just need to make sure you have the ASL library in that server page and that you basically indicate that that's authenticated. So now the device will recognize that the user is authenticated and logged in. Okay, so that's how you do it. The other, we have another authentication model, which is an application level service where the device doesn't really know anything about it. And I didn't really get into the details of that, but I just want to say check the developer's guide on that one. It has some walkthroughs. Okay, we got two more questions. I know probably, yeah, a couple minutes over. To develop smart badge applications, what are the tools required? Well, so Smart Badge applications, like I said, are web-based, HTML-based, and you can see we use JavaScript libraries for our APIs. So, as a bare bones, you really should know HTML and JavaScript. Pick any tool you like. At the end of the day, the device just needs those HTML and JavaScript, and of course CSS as well to make sure it fits on the screens. So those are the skills you need, and we really don't
And so I,
specify. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I was just saying from the tools, I often, if I want to create a quick app, I often just use a notepad.
Yep, Notepad. In my case, I use Sublime Text tool, Sublime Text 2. Anything that really, suits you. Okay. Somebody else also about that as well. What are the dev tools required for the development? There's really not so much tools required. It's really just the files. You need to make sure you have the JS. Definitely make sure the device is configured so that it knows where your application is via. Oops, wrong slide. Via the apps.json, the configuration file. So spend some time getting familiar with those, and you'll see what exactly you need. Okay. All right. I think I hit the last. Oh no, they're coming in still. Okay. If we don't use a row suite, what limitations are we placing on the solution? So you don't have to use the row suite. Like I said, use anything you'd like to develop. There's no limitations that will be placed on the solution. It's up to you to create the pages, but the more important thing is not so much the tools, but make sure your pages are performing well. Use the developer tools. Look at the other webinar that I mentioned that Ben and I did, and make sure your pages are structured nicely, that they fit on the screen, that they perform well, that they're using these best practices for rendering, etc. Right? Concentrate on those, and if you really are like starting at ground zero, I would look at the Sublime Text 2 webinar I did. I find that tool very useful, very productive for developing pages. It is not an IDE; it's just an editor like Notepad, but you can do things like do the snippets and some things that just make productivity really enhanced. Okay. And if you don't mind, same person, if you don't mind, can you provide us with the link where the whole material for the SB1 device can be available? Okay, so the whole link, again, for those downloads is getting started resources. It's this download link. It's on our support site, so where you download other software, like operating system upgrades, etc. It's in the same site, so software downloads. Excuse me, and there's the link for it. So if you look at the webinar, you'll be able to get the link. Okay, and let's see. Are there any reference books available for SB1? So we produce these developer guides. I don't think there's really any other manuals, books that have been produced outside that I know of. I would look at, if you're starting from from ground zero, You might want to take a look. There's definitely a lot of material, like I said before, on Backbone.js or single page app architecture. And if you watch those other webinars, I linked to other resources that are available for just general web performance tuning and things of that nature. So spend some time getting familiar with the browser dev tools. Our WebKit is Safari based, so you might want to use the Safari browser tools. I tend to go with Google. You can override the size of the screen and all, and even change the user agent. So you can do some of that stuff in Safari as well, but I find that most useful. All right, anything else? Looks like we still have everybody on. Last minute questions. Okay, Ben, do you have any other last minute advice?
No, I think you've covered everything, Rob.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody attending. Again, like I said, next time we're going to be going through a roads application and looking at all the different things that Banu has done over at Katir. So be sure to check that out. Also, if you're interested in SB1, I will be following up with other webinars and probably more than likely a blog post series to kind of walk through like a full application, right, with the web server and everything end to end. So just stay on the lookout for that. There's going to be more materials coming out regarding the SB1 from a developer point of view. Okay, let's see. I will, for those of you in North America, I will be at the partner conference February 17th through the 18th. So if you want to stop by the RhoMobile booth there, I will be there and you can ask me more questions on this or any other related RhoMobile topics. Okay, appreciate you guys joining today. I'm going to end the session. If you could just leave me some feedback when you exit, that would be fantastic. And we will catch you next time. Thanks again. Have a nice day, everybody.